Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and an overview of the new light cruiser line, or rather my thoughts on the light cruiser line that the US now has. This is definitely not some kind of comprehensive look at the stats or really anything other than my personal opinion on them because, well, frankly, I just don't like them very much, and they are somewhat capable ships in their allotted role, but the thing is, their allotted role is quite a narrow one. You can't really get a huge amount of flexibility out of them for the most part. And it basically comes down to the ballistic properties of those shells. Most of them are fairly short range as well, but given the nature of the shells, that's not really as much of an issue as it first appears, because even if they did have longer ranges, the shells just take so long to get there that you're never going to hit anything. And of course with the tier, is it 8, 9 and 10 or just 9 and 10, you can mount the 16% range upgrade module, and I've already encountered some Worcesters that have done that, and you can just easily, with a little bit of A or a little bit of D, you just turn either way or you vary your speed a little bit and they miss everything. So extra range isn't really going to help these ships, and because they're cruisers, they're also mostly fairly fragile. Everything I'm saying, by the way, was certainly true of the Cleveland when it was at tier 6, but the Cleveland at tier 6 at least had decent armour for a cruiser at tier 6, very decent armour, and it could be Citadel, certainly, but there is a definite difference between the Cleveland at tier 6 and at tier 8 in terms of the armour effectiveness. Most of the line is similarly quite squashy, or it can feel quite squashy. In this game you're certainly going to see this ship be quite squashy, and so really you're left with long shell flight times, shortish ranges, and squashy ships. And because you've also got these high arcs to go with these shells, most of the games I played in all of the testing ships, and I just picked this one out as an example, it also happened to be one of the better damage ones, you're going to want to try and do this where possible. You basically want to try and play them like a line of Atlantas. This is the optimal play style as far as I can see it. And it's not the only way you can play them. You can try and make them work over open water, but you're going to get far less good results out of it because of the nature of those guns and because you're going to be fighting at shorter ranges. And here's the thing. To me, this is really boring. I can play the Atlanta, and I've gotten some quite good results out of the Atlanta, but just sitting behind an island and pelting things over and over and over and over, it's not terribly interesting as a way of playing their games. I know some people are going to absolutely love these cruisers and how they play, and if you get on the wrong end of this, you know, rainbow arc of shells coming in your direction, it's going to be really annoying. But it is relatively easy to do something about, unless somebody's gotten themselves into a position like this where they're using an island and they've just got solid cover and they can't be spotted, at which point all you can do is try and dodge the shells or get out of their range. And getting out of their range, certainly with a tier 6, isn't that hard to do. I think it's only got like 14.6 kilometers range. In this particular case, you know, it's an epicenter game on Trident, and so everybody's more or less concentrated towards the middle anyway, which is great for this ship, because if you have to go hunting for enemies over open water, life gets a bit more difficult. One of the ships we're testing at the moment, which was we did have previously as the Boise, is actually now on its own national tech tree, and it's had some changes as well. The Nuevo de Julia, or Julio, or I don't even know how one would pronounce it. Well, the first one was almost certainly wrong. But that is even shorter range than this, and it's a tier 7. It's basically a Perth-style ship at tier 7, but without the smoke, and far worse surface concealment, and nobody likes that combination at the moment. So yeah, that one's really awkward indeed, and I'll probably do a separate video on that at some point, although hopefully they change it. But the fact that it's short range and not particularly stealthy, well, I mean, most of these ships especially you get to tier 8 and above, that they are at least reasonably stealthy, but that's not going to help you that much over open water because your firing ranges are generally so short, and your effective firing ranges where you can do damage are reasonably short. And I just playing this specific game, playing basically every game I played in these ships, up to and including the Worcester, I was just bored, basically, because you can't really afford to get up close and personal. It's not like you've got torpedoes, for example. You can't make that kind of last-ditch effort that one could in the British cruisers, and the British cruisers, of course, can make their own cover as well. The entire thing seems to me to be a really awkward combination, especially as you can't do quite the things you could do in the old Cleveland. Not that I played the old Cleveland a huge amount, but you know, if you wanted to take it out and do some open water kiting at tier 6, that was a viable option. But it doesn't really feel so much like a viable option in the Dallas, or really many of the others, apart from, you know, you get to tier 9 and 10, you've got a bit more range to work with. But if you're firing at those longer ranges, people can dodge so easily, as I've said. If you get, like the Atlanta though, if you get somebody at really close range, you have, generally speaking, with most of these ships, a pretty nice broadside, especially with the tier 7. You get, what is it, 10? I can't remember exactly. But it's just, no, not 10, it's like 5, is it 5 triple turrets? Is it 15? Oh, or I'm completely confusing myself trying to remember which ships have which gun configurations now. Anyway, it's got a really nice broadside, and if you get a cruiser with AP at close range in their broadside, or hell, even a destroyer, you know, I've had a game or two where I caught a destroyer out at, like, you know, 5 or 6 kilometers, and they're just dead in 2 salvos, then that can be funny, but you don't get to do that often. Most of the time, you want to be doing this, just sitting behind an island, firing your HE shells over and over and over. And that actually leads me on to another thing I wanted to say, is that these ships all have a fairly limited amount of options in terms of viable captain builds as well. You can go full AA, but for the most part, you're not really going to have the points for a full AA spec, because you're going to need Concealment Expert and you're going to need IFHE. And if you don't have IFHE, I mean, at tier 6 you might get away without it. With the old tier 6 Cleveland, I played a full AA spec Cleveland with manual AA and AFT, and did I even have Concealment Expert? I don't think I did. And that was viable, because with the ships that you're facing at that tier, you can just rely on setting fires rather than the amount of damage done. But you get to tier 7, tier 8 and above, you need IFHE, because you're just going to get so many shatters otherwise. And even though I think shatters can produce fires just from having, you know, managed to hit somebody, it's a really unreliable way to do damage if you're not also getting some damage from the HE shells as you're going. So it really ties you down in terms of what you can do with these ships, both in terms of how you play them and the kind of setups that you can have with them. And I'm not opposed to light cruisers generally, you know, the Soviet light cruisers with 6-inch guns are really interesting, challenging, fun ships to play in their way. And they have range and much better ballistic properties to work with, but they're also, you know, they're still fragile, and they absolutely do maneuver horribly. So they have some downsides. And even with those ships, if you're firing at very, very long ranges, you are going to struggle to hit things more. This just doesn't have any of those options. It absolutely does not. And it's just, for this entire line, it's going to be a line where, you know, it's going to be annoying to face off against under certain circumstances. But for the most part, they really feel like support ships. They don't really feel like ships where you can significantly change the outcome of a battle enough when it's starting to go against you, as it is in this particular replay. And I'm certainly racking up decent amounts of damage, but we're doing poorly enough in map control, and they're starting to push around from the north enough that I've lost now that island as viable cover, so I'm having to fall back. And you'll get to see just how little punishment this ship can take. Yeah, that's going to turn out to have been a double citadel from, I can't even remember who it was from exactly, but they do say in the chat later, you know, they commiserate and say, I'm sorry about the double citadel. So, yeah, it's not like I even can do much now from this point because I just have no health, and it just went just like that. And it's not a nice combination for me personally. I don't enjoy that combination of having very short range guns on a fragile ship with slow shells. And you kind of get that with, say, some of the British cruisers, but they have the extra thing of being able to put down their own smoke, and they are much stealthier for the most part. Well, in fact, no, they are much stealthier. So they've got some things going for them that these cruisers don't. And all of this that I'm saying, by the way, you know, this is entirely my subjective opinion on these ships, and I absolutely get that some people will enjoy these ships and enjoy their play style. But for my mind, they're not entirely unlike when Wargaming finally added in the Japanese heavy tanks to World of Tanks, which it took a long time actually. They initially weren't going to do it. They tested them, decided they weren't a good idea, and then about, what, year and a half, 2 years later, they added them in at that point, and they weren't really a great thing for the game, and I'm not convinced the line as it plays is a great thing for the game. But I can't really argue that they're not viable damage dealers, because they can be. It's just the kind of playstyle they represent is sort of annoying. You know, there's not really much you can do about somebody that is camping behind an island successfully. I've got a Cleveland game actually from a couple of months ago where it was a situation not unlike this, only the team wasn't flailing as badly, as it were, and so I was able to just sit behind an island for quite a long time and farm chunks of damage out of people. And you know, as a kind of a novelty value thing, okay, it's sort of amusing if you do that once in a while, but if that's the entire playstyle of an entire line of cruisers, that's not novelty value at that point. That's just boring in my eyes. And as I say, I don't necessarily think it's a great thing for the game, because the only real way you can counter this is to do what this enemy team is doing, actually, to try and close out the angles that somebody has to get effective fields of fire. You know, either you avoid somebody entirely, get out of the range, or else you make it so that they can't use those islands anymore. And at this point, I know that there is going to be a Cleveland coming up behind me at some point. I could have tried to get a bit closer to my allies, and in retrospect, I probably should have. I think I just about had the stealth to get away from the island and maybe do it. But the US cruisers aren't especially fast, so it's a bit of a, you know, I'd certainly had lost my window of opportunity of doing it at this point. And I think I was just thinking we had lost this and was just trying to see how much damage I could get out of the game, basically. And there is going to be a little bit more damage yet, but not too much more at this point. So 90 plus K damage, you know, I've got 2 kills. This has not been a totally ineffective game. But I did not enjoy myself playing it. I absolutely did not. And if we'd won, you know, that would have been nice, but I still wouldn't have enjoyed myself, because this is just boring. So I don't think I'm going to be in any particular rush to go down the light cruiser line. The Worcester is, yeah, you know, it's an okay ship, but it's more of this, and it doesn't really. It's not one of those lines. You know, I'll give it this. It's a consistent line. It's not one of those lines where there are tiers that represent any significant differences in play style or anything different to look forward to. They are basically the same all the way down the lines, or the line even. So it's consistent at least, I suppose. But yeah, I would have liked a bit more variety. That's actually one of the things I like about the German cruisers, for example, or the Soviet cruisers, is that there are different things going on as you get to various places. So we very firmly lost this one at this point. The remaining Allied ships, you know, we killed a fair few of the enemy team. We killed most of the enemy team, but our ships just couldn't seem to get the upper hand, and our battleships especially didn't seem to be being hugely effective. They just had healthier battleships at the end, and that Cleveland that's left alive, I think they turned out to have done very well for themselves as well. Yeah, they've got 5 kills, including me, so they actually earned themselves a Kraken. So it was not a complete ruffle stomp, but it was kind of clear, to me anyway, playing that one as we were going through it, that we were just letting it go through our fingers. And despite having done 100k damage and gotten 2 kills myself, it didn't feel like I was really in a position to influence the outcome of that one any more than I did. And partly that's just a cruiser problem. Partly that is the nature of being in a fragile ship. But with longer range cruisers, you know, if I'd been in a Budyoni there instead, it would have given me more options to work with. Whereas with the Dallas, it was just, I have to sit behind an island and spend some more time behind an island. And hey, look, here's another island. It's just, I don't know. It's tedious. It's just tedious is what it is. So, again, I will repeat myself. I know I do that anyway, but this is entirely my subjective opinion. They're not bad ships per se, but I don't particularly think it's a great thing for the game that we have now an entire line of these instead of just one particular example. Maybe they might tweak them or do something different with them in future that opens up the possible play styles a bit more, but I don't know. I think you'd have to fundamentally change the nature of the US 6-inch gun to do that, so I don't really see that happening anytime soon. Anyway, so I imagine this video might generate 1 or 2 comments. We shall see. If you do have something you feel like you'd like to add, you can do so in the comments section below. You can do all the other usual things as well, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.